8 small bodies trembled beneath her boots, and the earth was still giving way. Elara Whitmore hit the ground on one knee and barely felt it. Her flashlight skidded across the frozen dirt, beam jerking over slick clay, broken roots, and a knot of wolf pups pressed into the narrow corner of the pit. 8 of them, all alive, all terrified enough to make no sound at first. Then one whimpered. The sound went through her like a blade. She pushed herself upright, breath sharp in her throat, and looked up. The rim of the pit felt impossibly far away now, a rough black circle cut into white snow and pine shadows. Rowan Hale was already on his stomach at the edge, one arm braced in the dirt, the other reaching down with the rope they had anchored to a spruce. "Elara," he called, low and steady. "Talk to me." "They're here." Her voice came out rough. "All 8. For 1 second, neither of them moved. The truth of it settled hard between them. The tracks, the collapse, the frantic scent of milk and fear. She had been right to go down. Then the wall to her left crumbled with a dry hiss. Elara turned fast. A sheet of dirt sloughed off and struck her shoulder. One of the smallest pups tumbled sideways, squealing now, tiny legs scrambling in the mud. She lunged and caught it against her chest before it slid under the falling soil. "Back!" Rowan shouted. "I've got it." The pup shook violently in her hands, its fur cold and wet, heartbeat fluttering against her palm. The others crowded tighter, climbing over one another, blind with panic. Elara sank lower, making herself smaller, using her body to shield them from the loosening wall. That was when she saw what the dark had hidden. Wire. Not roots. Not old fencing dragged in by weather. Fresh steel cable twisted through the dirt near the back of the pit, half buried and mean. A trap line. The collapse wasn't clean. This place had been made worse by human hands. "Rowan," she said, staring at it. "There's wire down here." His face changed instantly. "Are they caught?" She shifted the flashlight. One pup near the rear was pinned by a loop tightened around its hind leg. The cable sunk so deep into the fur she hadn't seen it at first. Blood had dried black along the ankle. "Yes," she said. "One is snared." The pause above her lasted less than a breath, but she felt the weight of Rowan's decision in it. If he climbed down, the walls could fail completely. If he stayed up top, she would be alone with a trapped, injured pup and 7 others one hard noise away from a stampede in a hole too small to survive one. Then Rowan moved. Not down into the pit. Across it. He disappeared from the rim, boots pounding through snow, and Elara's heart kicked once in alarm before she understood. He was changing the angle. Seconds later, he reappeared on the opposite side with a fallen branch nearly 8 feet long. He drove it across the opening, wedging it against 2 thick roots to spread the weight off the weakest edge. "Better support," he said, already looping the rope around the branch. "I'm sending down my pack." A canvas field bag dropped within reach. Elara dragged it close with one hand, while keeping the trembling pup pinned gently against her coat with the other. Inside were gloves, wire cutters, gauze, a thermal blanket, and the folding knife Rowan never let out of sight. He knew exactly what she needed. "You trusted I'd find them," she said before she could stop herself. Rowan met her eyes across the dark. "I trusted you'd go where I couldn't." The words landed deeper than the fall had. Elara pulled on the gloves and crawled toward the snared pup inch by inch. The pack recoiled from her movement, all wide paws and frightened eyes, but none tried to bite. They were too cold, too exhausted. Cold air sat at the bottom of the pit like standing water, dense enough to taste. Mud clung to every inch of the narrow slope Elara Whitmore had carved with her own boots on the way down. Above her, the night showed only as a ragged circle rimmed with roots, and beyond that dark edge, 9 wolves moved in silence. The trapped pup lay twisted against the wall where the loose wire had bitten deep into one hind leg. Rust stained the wet fur. Every time it struggled, the snare cinched tighter. Elara steadied her breathing. "Easy," she whispered, though she knew the animal did not understand the word. Tone mattered more than language. Pain knew tone. Fear knew tone. Behind her, the other 7 pups were packed together in a trembling knot, ribs fluttering, ears flat, too weak to scramble away. The smell down here was all wrong for a den. Cold clay, old metal, blood, panic. Someone had meant this hole to catch something larger and had almost taken an entire bloodline instead. Above, Rowan Hale shifted near the rim. Dirt trickled down. Talk to me. Wire snare. Elara called up, keeping her voice even. Buried in the mud. I need light lower and steady. A beat later, the beam angled down, no longer sweeping. He had listened the first time. That mattered more than she wanted it to. The pup snapped when her gloved fingers touched the wire. Not with strength. With terror. The tiny teeth scraped leather. Then the animal crumpled back with a thin sound that hardly counted as a growl. Elara moved slower. One hand cupped the pup's chest to keep it from thrashing. The other traced the snare to its anchor point. Not a simple loop. Twisted twice. Yanked hard. Set by someone who knew animals fought hardest when they smelled freedom. Her jaw tightened. Can you cut it? Rowan asked. If I had cutters. The silence above lasted only a second, but it carried calculation. Then his voice dropped, closer to the ground. There's old fencing near the service road. I can make it there and back in 10 minutes. No. The answer left her before she waited. She looked up into the black ring overhead. If you leave, they may come down. Not the pups. The pack. A pale shape stepped into view at the rim, broad-headed and still. The alpha male. Moonlight touched one shoulder and turned his coat silver-white. He was not baring teeth. He was watching. Rowan understood at once. Then we do this with what we have. That was the moment the balance shifted. No rescue was coming from town. No tools. No backup. Only the choices already inside this hole and the man above it. Elara slid her fingers deeper into the mud until she found the buried stake. It would not budge. She tried twisting the wire instead. The pup cried out. 7 small bodies flinched behind her. Stop, Rowan said sharply, not to command her, but because he heard what the sound meant. She shut her eyes for one beat, forcing herself past the rush of frustration. The cold was getting into the pups now. The weakest one had stopped shivering. That was worse. I need tension off the leg, she said. If the loop loosens even half an inch, I can work it over the joint. Rowan was quiet again. Then, tie the free end to your rope. Her head lifted. There isn't enough room. There will be if I anchor from above and pull sideways. The idea hit hard because it was risky and because it might work. It would also put the full strain on the wall. If the dirt gave way, the pit could collapse on her and the pups. Mud slid under her knee as if to answer the thought. Elara. His voice was lower now, stripped of everything but urgency. You trusted I'd find them. Trust me here. The pale alpha male took one step closer to the rim. Not a threat. A witness. The pale alpha male took one step closer to the rim. Not a threat. A witness. Rain-dark dirt shivered under the pressure of his weight, then settled again. The other wolves held their line in the trees. 8 shapes hidden by brush and shadow, one more visible only when the wind changed and carried the silver flash of wet fur. Below, the sound that mattered most came thin and ragged from the pit. Tiny whines. Scratching too weak to last much longer. The rope crate had failed twice already. The first time, it had swung too hard against the wall and sent loose dirt raining down over the pups. The second time, one of the smallest had tried to crawl in, only to get its hind legs cinched tighter in a knot of roots and old wire hidden under the mud. Remote rescue was no longer rescue. It was fear from a distance, dressed up as caution. Rowan Hale knew it too. Elara could hear it in the silence he left after his warning. One wrong move could trigger the wolves. Not because they were cruel. Because they were watching their young suffer while 2 humans leaned over the edge with ropes, wood, and plans that kept failing. Elara wiped muddy fingers across her mouth and looked down again. The pit was deeper than it had seemed from above, close to 12 feet where the wall dropped nearly straight. Rainwater had carved one side smooth, but the opposite wall was webbed with roots, jagged stones, and the rusted remains of an old snare line half buried in clay. That was the real trap, not the fall. The panic after. I can't pull them out blind from up here, she said. Rowan was already shaking his head. If that wall gives, you'll bury yourself with them. If I stay here, they die tangled. The words landed between them with no room left for softer versions. His jaw tightened. Mud streaked one side of his face where he had gone to one knee near the edge earlier, trying to get a better angle on the crate line. He looked past her to the wolves, measuring distance, response, odds. Former forest ranger instincts still moved through him like muscle memory. Protect the living. Limit the risk. Never corner a wild pack with young involved. But Elara was measuring something else. breathing pattern, weakness, time. One pup had stopped crying. That frightened her more than the snarling had. She leaned farther over the rim, careful not to send more dirt down. In the dim bottom, she could finally make out all 8 small bodies, pressed against one another in a frantic knot of gray and black and pale brown fur. 2 were free enough to move. 3 were pinned by roots. One had the rusted wire looped around its belly. Another lay partly under a sibling, chest rising too slowly. The last was curled, so still she could not tell whether it was sleeping or fading. Her training cut through panic with brutal clarity. Hypothermia, compression, shock. If she did not get hands on them, she would start losing them one by one. "Rowan," she said quietly, "listen to me." He looked at her then, fully, and she saw the exact moment he understood what she was about to say. "No, I need to go down." "No, sharper now. Immediate." "Elara, if you slip, if they think you're hurting the pups, I won't hurt them. That won't matter if the pack thinks you will." The pale alpha male was still standing at the rim, close enough now that she could see the rain caught in his coat. His stare never left her hands. Not her face, not the rope, her hands. A test, maybe, or a warning. Elara slowly opened both palms where he could see them, empty except for mud. Then she reached for the rescue line. "You said they're reading intent. Fine, then let them read mine." Rowan swore under his breath and grabbed the rope before she could thread it around her waist wrong with numb fingers. Mud gave under her before the rope fully caught, swallowing one boot to the ankle and dragging her sideways into the dark. The pit was deeper than it had looked from above, close to 10 feet in the center, its walls slick with rain-black clay and roots that snapped loose when touched. Cold struck first. Then the smell, wet fur, iron-rich earth, and the sharp, frightened musk of young wolves packed too tightly together. 8 of them. They were half buried along the sloping side where the den had collapsed in on itself, little bodies shivering under a skin of mud. One pup let out a thin cry that barely sounded alive. Another did not move at all until Elara Whitmore dropped to her knees and brushed mud away from its muzzle. Breath. Weak, but there. Above her, the storm-washed rim cut a jagged circle of gray light. Rowan Hale braced himself with both hands on the rope, boots grinding for purchase. "Talk to me. All 8 are here." Her voice came out tighter than she meant. "Cold. Injured. Some pinned." The rope shifted once as he adjusted his grip. "How bad?" A low crumble answered before she could. Dirt hissed down the far wall. The whole pit gave a soft, terrible sigh, as if the ground had decided it was not done collapsing. Bad, she thought. Elara forced herself to breathe through the panic pressing at the back of her throat. Claustrophobia had no mercy underground. The walls leaned close. Rain threaded through roots overhead. Every sound felt trapped with her, every whine, every scrape, every small choking gasp from the pups. But panic used air she could not spare. She crawled toward the nearest pair. One had a foreleg twisted under a slab of packed mud and broken roots. The other was trying to cover its sibling with its own body, trembling so hard its teeth clicked. "Easy," she whispered, though the word was really for herself. No gloves. Numb hands. Unstable weight. She worked the mud away by inches, careful not to pull the trapped leg wrong. It was colder beneath the surface, almost icy, sucking heat from her fingers until they burned. The pup snapped once from pain, but weakly, more reflex than threat. Elara did not pull back. She slid 2 fingers under the root pinning the limb, shifted her balance, and lifted. The wall behind her cracked. A sheet of mud slumped down against her shoulder hard enough to knock her chest first into the ground. One of the pups yelped. Above, the rope jerked taut. "Elara, I'm here." She coughed mud from her mouth and pushed herself up. More dirt kept trickling over her back. "Don't pull me up." A beat of stunned silence. "Then tell me what you need," Rowan said, voice rough now, stripped down to command and fear. Agency changed hands in that instant. Not him directing from above. Her deciding what happened inside the hole. "I need tension on the line, not lift," she called. "Keep it centered over my left shoulder. If the wall gives, I'll use it to stay off them." He moved without arguing. The rope angle changed, steadying her instead of dragging. Smart. Fast. Trusting her. Around the rim, shapes paced in and out of the rain. 9 wolves. Silent now, which felt worse than growling. Their agitation had changed texture. No longer warning alone. Waiting. watching every second she touched the pups. The pale alpha male came into view once more, close enough that Rowan had to shift his stance to keep both the rope and the wolves in sight. He did not lunge, did not bare his teeth, but his stillness carried pressure. Time was running out. Elara reached the motionless pup first, buried to the ribs, cold as river stone. She dug with both hands, ignoring the way the mud sucked at her wrists and the fresh slide of dirt peppering the back of her neck. The tiny body came free with a wet pull. Too limp. No, she whispered. Mud clung to the small body in a heavy skin, sealing the pup's ribs and mouth with cold earth. Breathless, shaking, Elara dropped to her knees in the cramped dark and swept 2 fingers across its muzzle. For one terrible beat, there was nothing. Then a stutter, a weak, ragged flutter against her skin. Air left her in a broken rush. It's alive, she called upward, though the pit swallowed half the sound. Above her, the rope creaked. Rowan Hale had already braced himself harder at the edge, boots dug into the soaked ground. One hand locked around the line, the other lifted slightly, as if any sudden motion might tip the world the wrong way. Rain tapped through the branches overhead in thin, uneven drops. The wolves had not moved away. That was what made the fear different now. Not the teeth, not the numbers, the waiting. Elara dragged the pup against her chest and rubbed its side through the mud, firm and steady, trying to wake warmth back into a body that felt frighteningly light. A second pup whimpered somewhere to her left, buried deeper under the partial cave-in. Another thin cry answered from behind her. The sound was weak enough to vanish if the wind shifted. "We need to move fast," Rowan said. But his voice had changed. Lower, sharper in a different way. Elara looked up. The pale alpha male had stepped closer to the rim. Not charging, not posturing, just closing the distance with a calm that felt larger than violence. Massive shoulders under wet fur. Head level. Yellow eyes fixed not on her throat, not on Rowan's hands, but on the pup she was holding. Behind him, the rest of the pack held their ground in a rough crescent between the trees, 8 shadows and 1 pale king, silent enough to make the forest seem like it was listening too. Rowan saw it at the same moment she did. "They're not setting up for an attack," he said, almost to himself. The alpha's ears flicked once, a measured motion. Then his gaze shifted to Rowan, and the old ranger went still. Trust was not the right word yet. Trust was warm, human. This was colder than that. A judgment, a decision not made. Elara swallowed and lifted the limp pup a little higher, enough for the wolves above to see its chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls. "I'm helping them," she said, her voice rough with mud and strain. She did not know whether she was speaking to Rowan or to the animal watching from the edge. The pale wolf stepped to the very lip of the pit. Dirt loosened beneath his weight and pattered down around her shoulders. Elara froze, every muscle flinching for impact. It never came. Instead, the alpha lowered his head and inhaled deeply, taking in her scent, the trapped pups, the rope, the human man above. His restraint filled the space harder than a snarl could have. Rowan's expression changed with a kind of stunned clarity. Years in the forest had taught him to read what panic missed. "He's making a choice," he said. Elara tightened one arm around the pup and reached with the other toward the nearest small shape still trapped in the mud wall. "Then tell him to keep choosing." A sound came from above, not a growl, not quite. A short rumbling pulse from deep in the alpha's chest. At once, the pack behind him shifted. Every nerve in Rowan's body lit up. But the wolves did not rush the pit. 2 of them broke from the line and moved wide, circling not toward Elara, but toward the anchored rope. One nosed at the line where it cut across the ground. Another planted its paws, testing the pull. Rowan stared, rain running off his brow, understanding arriving in pieces so strange his face almost refused them. "They know what it's for," he said. Elara dug her fingers into the clay around the second pup. "Then use that." The mud fought her harder now. Rain slicked the rope until it looked like a living thing, dark and tense across the lip of the pit. The 2 wolves nearest the anchor leaned back with their weight low, claws digging trenches through wet leaves, while a third paced the edge and kept its eyes fixed on the hole where Elara Whitmore had vanished beneath the earth. Below, the space had grown tighter without warning. What had been a cramped pocket of mud and roots shuddered, then gave way with a grinding sigh. Clay sloughed off the wall in a heavy sheet. It hit Elara across the shoulder and back, drove her sideways, and buried the half-freed pup she'd been reaching for. Another wave followed right after, colder and thicker, pouring down her neck and pinning her left arm to the wall. The pit shrank around her. A thin cry broke under the mud. Elara's heart lurched so hard it hurt. She twisted, trying to drag her arm free, but the pressure only tightened. Wet clay held her from shoulder to wrist. One knee slipped deeper. Her flashlight, wedged against a root, threw a weak beam across the den and caught the tiny muzzle of the buried pup. Mud covered its nose and mouth. Its body was still moving, but barely. "Rowan." Her voice came out raw. "One can't breathe." The answer came instantly from above, closer than before. Rowan Hale was already on his stomach at the rim, one arm braced around a rock, rain streaming off his sleeve. "Tell me where." "Right side, by the broken root." She shoved with her free hand, scraping mud away from the pup's face with 2 fingers. "I'm stuck." Silence lasted less than a second. Then she heard it in his breathing. The exact moment he understood he could not simply haul her up without crushing the pups or burying the rest. Above ground, the wolves shifted before he did. The pale alpha male stood 10 feet back, rigid and watchful, water silvering his coat. The rest of the pack had stopped circling. They were listening to the sounds from below, the pups' strangled cries, the collapsing clay, Elara's breath turning ragged in the dark. Rowan looked at the anchor line, then at the wolves gripping the first rope in their strange, deliberate formation. A new slide rattled loose from the pit wall. Earth spilled over Elara's boots. He moved fast. "Don't pull," he shouted to the wolves, absurd and fierce, as if command alone could bridge species. Then he scrambled to the truck bed, seized the recovery strap, a steel carabiner, and the old ladder rack bar he'd ripped loose that morning and never put back. He jammed the bar across 2 boulders near the edge, lashed the strap around its center, and built a second line with shaking hands. Rain made everything slick. Time made every knot feel too slow. Below, Elara kept digging. Her fingers found fur, then the tiny jaw beneath it. The pup coughed once, small, wet, terrible. Relief flashed through her so sharply it almost broke her. She cleared its nose, lifted its chin, and used the heel of her palm to brace its chest above the mud. Then the wall groaned again. A root snapped overhead. The pressure on her trapped arm increased until black spots burst across her vision. She bit back a cry. Around her boots, the floor of the pit had turned soft and unstable, sucking downward. The den was not only collapsing inward, it was settling lower. "Rowan." This time fear stripped the word clean. "It's dropping." "I know." He was back at the edge, clipping the second line to a loop around his waist. "I'm coming down partway." "No." She looked up toward the narrow strip of stormlight. "If the wall goes. If I don't, you lose that arm and they lose all of you." There was no room left to argue. He lowered himself just 6 feet, boots braced against the wall, body suspended over the narrowing shaft. One hand gripped the new line. Dirt whispered down in thin streams, soft at first, then steady enough to raise a gray haze in the shaft. The sound changed everything. It was no longer only about pain, or fear, or even the 8 trembling bodies crowded against Elara Whitmore's knees. The pit itself had begun to decide. Rowan Hale hung 6 feet below the rim, one boot grinding for purchase, shoulders straining against the rope line cinched at his waist. The second line dropped toward her through the dim. "We do this faster," he said, voice clipped by effort. "You hook them. I haul." No wasted motion. Elara's left arm burned where the wall had scraped skin raw, but she forced her fingers to work, one pup at a time. That had been the only rule that kept panic from swallowing her. She gathered the nearest little body, felt its ribs fluttering like trapped birds, and clipped the loop under its chest. Rowan hauled. The rope tightened. The pup rose, spinning once, claws paddling at empty air. A growl rolled over the edge above them. Not the warning crackle they had lived with all night. This was deeper, focused. Elara looked up through the narrow slice of stormlight. 9 shadows moved around the rim, massive and silent except for their breathing. At the center stood the pale alpha male, reins silvering his back. Every wolf in the pack had held the line until now, pacing, watching, refusing human closeness, but not breaking it. This time, as the pup neared the top, 2 dark wolves stepped in. Rowan went rigid. "Don't move." The command was for Elara, but his body had already shifted toward the hunting knife at his belt with the instinct of a man who had spent years reading danger in the woods. Above him, the two wolves did not snap at the dangling pup. They caught the line in their teeth. For one impossible second, Rowan just stared. The pup cleared the edge faster than his injured arm could have managed alone. Another wolf nudged the tiny body back from the drop, her muzzle low, careful, almost reverent. The pale alpha male never took his eyes off the shaft. He gave one short chuff. Rowan's breath left him rough. Again, it was no longer a rescue in the shape either of them understood. Elara hooked the next pup with shaking hands. Rowan hauled until the strain hit his arm, and his face tightened white with pain. Before the rope could slip, 3 wolves surged in unison at the top, not attacking, not claiming, but pulling. Their power traveled straight down the line. The pup flew upward. The wall shuddered. Clods of wet earth struck Elara's shoulder, then her hair. A crack split through the packed clay at her back. The pit was narrowing by inches now, each collapse stealing space and air. One of the pups cried out, thin and desperate, and buried itself against her stomach. "We're out of time," Rowan said. He was right, and they both knew what came next cost more than trust. Trust could still be taken back. This could not. He looked up at the wolves, then down at Elara, disbelief and decision colliding in his eyes. "I'm giving them the line." The words felt insane even here. But the pale alpha male answered before fear could. He dropped flat at the edge, jaws closing around the main rope just above the knot. The rest of the pack moved instantly, as if the command had passed through all 9 bodies at once. Not wild chaos. Formation. Elara understood before Rowan did. They're distributing the weight. Rowan swallowed hard, then fed rope through his palms and let the wolves take tension. Every old instinct in him fought the motion. Years in the forest had taught him what happened when a human surrendered leverage to a pack. Yet the line held, stronger than before. "Send me 2 at once," he said. Her head snapped up. "The wall won't hold. It won't hold if we keep doing this slow." The rope jerked so hard it burned through Rowan Hale's gloves, and for 1/6 second, the entire line dipped toward the pit. Above ground, the 9 wolves of the Alpha King's pack widened their stance in the mud, claws cutting trenches, bodies low and braced like living anchors. The pale alpha male stood at the front, muzzle lifted, breath steaming in the cold dusk, and when he leaned back, the rest followed him with perfect force. Below, the basket swung wild against the dirt wall. Elara Whitmore threw one arm around it, and the other around 2 squirming pups pressed against her chest. Their hearts battered against her ribs, frantic and hot. Loose soil peppered her hair, slid down the back of her jacket, and gathered in the bend of her knees where she crouched in the cramped hollow. "Now!" Rowan shouted. The line surged upward. For a breathless instant, the 2 pups vanished into the dark shaft above her. Then one tiny cry echoed from the rim, followed by another. "Safe!" Elara shut her eyes once, hard, and turned back to the one still left. 6. The den was shrinking around her. It did not feel like a hole anymore. It felt like a throat trying to close. A fresh crack shivered through the wall at her left. Not the warning creak from before. This was sharper, deeper. "Final." "Elara," Rowan called, his voice rough with urgency. Fast. No argument left now. No careful pacing. No illusion that there was enough time to do this gently. She gathered 2 more pups, one under each arm, and pushed them into the sling. They fought her in blind panic, little paws scratching at the rope net, muzzles searching for heat and milk and safety. Her hands moved anyway, steady because they had to, tender because that was the only way she knew how to touch frightened things. Up. This time the lift came crooked. Dirt sheared away under the basket, showering her face. She coughed, blinked grit from her lashes, and flattened herself over the remaining pups as a clump of earth broke loose from overhead and slammed beside her shoulder. Pain flashed down her arm. Not broken. Still usable. Above, chaos answered. Rowan dropped to one knee at the rim, hauling hand over hand while the wolves dragged backward in a brutal, synchronized pull. The rope hummed. One of the pups in the net shrieked. Then the weight cleared the lip. 4. The air inside the pit had changed. Less oxygen. More dust. Every breath tasted like old clay and root rot. Elara could hear the wall settling in tiny internal ticks, like bones under pressure. She looked up once and saw Rowan's silhouette against the bruised evening sky. Beyond him, the pale alpha male did not move his gaze from the hole. He was not merely watching anymore. He was holding the line with her life on it. Trust arrived without permission. Sharp as fear. Stranger than fear. Again, Rowan shouted. She almost laughed at the absurdity of the word. Again, as if they were repeating a drill and not gambling with seconds. But her body obeyed before the thought finished. 2 more pups. Into the sling. One nearly slipped free, and she caught it against her chest, kissing the top of its dirt-caked head before forcing herself to let go. The pull came harder now, desperate and uneven. The whole pit trembled. A slab of the sidewall peeled inward and exploded beside her boots. Soil flooded over her ankles. One remaining pup vanished under it with a strangled yelp. No, she dropped instantly, digging with both hands, scooping dirt in frantic, blind sweeps until fur met her fingers. She dragged the pup free, coughing mud, its little body shaking but alive. The last 2 pressed against her stomach, trying to climb into her. "Rowan," she cried. "I've got them. Send the last pair." The command broke something open in her, not because it was harsh, but because he believed she could still do it. Rowan heard her through the wind, not just the words, the change inside them. He dropped flat at the rim, one arm wrapped around the pine trunk anchoring him, the other reaching for the rope with bloodless fingers. Snow hissed across the ground. Below, Elara Whitmore was half buried in darkness, mud to her elbows, 3 pups pressed against her chest and stomach. The 4th trembled in her grip, alive because she had refused to stop digging. "I'm sending the next one," he shouted. His voice came rough, shredded by cold and fear, but steady. He turned, scooped up one of the remaining pups from the tarp, and slid back to the edge. The pale alpha male stood 10 feet away, still as carved ice, gold eyes locked on Rowan Hale's hands. This time, Rowan did not flinch from him. He lowered the pup into the pit. Elara caught it against her shoulder with a soft, breathless sound, shifting the others with the practiced instinct of someone who had spent years calming injured creatures without adding to their panic. 8 heartbeats. 8 small bodies. Every one of them shaking, whining, fighting to live. "One more," she called. Rowan grabbed the last pup. When he leaned over again, the rope cut into his palm. He barely felt it. His whole body had narrowed to a single need. Get them out before the pit collapsed, before Elara's strength gave out, before the wolves decided trust had lasted long enough. The final pup disappeared into the dark. For one suspended second, there was nothing but wind. Then Elara's voice rose from below, cracked and triumphant. "All 8. Something passed through the wolves at that sound. Not a charge, not a threat, a current. The 9 of them moved at once around the pit's edge, silent and exact. The pale alpha stepped closest, lowered his massive head, and looked down into the hole where his offspring were gathered around the woman who smelled of fear, mud, and mercy. Elara looked up at him, breath steaming, face streaked brown and red. She did not bow. She did not beg. She simply said, "Help me." The alpha moved. He seized the rope in his jaws and pulled back with a force that made the line snap taut. At once, 2 wolves braced behind him, then 2 more, claws digging trenches in the snow. Rowan stared only half a heartbeat before understanding hit him. They were not waiting for him to do this alone. He wrapped both hands around the rope and hauled with them. "Elara," he shouted, "tie the sling under the first pair." She worked fast despite fingers that could barely close. 2 pups went into the sling. Rowan and the wolves dragged them up together. The bundle scraped the wall, tipped, then slid over the rim into Rowan's arms. He cut the loop free, and immediately one gray she-wolf stepped in, nosing the pups against her chest before carrying them back. Again, the second pair came up coughing dirt. Then the third, then the 7th pup alone, because the smallest could not stop squirming and Elara had tucked it inside her coat to keep it warm while she secured the other. By the time the 8th reached the surface, Rowan was trembling almost as hard as the pups were. Only Elara remained below. She tried to stand and failed. Mud gave way beneath her boots. The wall she had pressed against all this time sloughed off in a wet crumble. Rowan dropped to his stomach so fast his knees slammed rock. "Elara, I'm here," she said, but her voice had gone thin. For the first time that night, she let herself look like someone at the edge of her strength. Her head tipped back against the dirt wall. Her lashes were white with frost. The smallest pup clung inside her coat, its tiny nose hidden under her chin. Rowan's throat tightened. "Tie-in." She gave a weak laugh. "You say that like my hands still work." Before he could answer, the alpha came forward again.